Hello, and welcome back to Lazypedia, the show where I scroll through a Wikipedia page and read it, for those who are too lazy to read it themselves. And, to a lesser extent, those who are unable to do so. But mostly just lazy. Today has been a bit of an interesting day. I initially recorded a video on the wyvern, and then, right as I was saving it at the end, my hard drive crashed and I lost it. So I took that as a sign from on high that the video just wasn't interesting enough. So I have shifted wyvern to the side. Maybe I'll do it another day. Today is going to be an even bigger day. We're going to talk about dragons. You already knew that because it's in the title of the video, so there wasn't really any surprise on your part, but there was on mine. And that's what matters. Ha ha! So this is a longer page. There's quite a few descriptions because obviously dragons are found in mythology all over the world. So buckle up, let's just jump right in. Just as a reminder, I will probably be reading it more or less word for word from Wikipedia, and Wikipedia isn't exactly flawless. So if you really want absolutely correct information, this might not be the place. However, Wikipedia is a lot better than people give it credit for. So if you want to have a pretty decent understanding of dragons, get ready, because you're gonna. And also, you can watch a video game at the same time. Or just listen to this in the background. You do you. Dragon. A dragon is a large, serpentine legendary creature that appears in the folklore of many cultures around the world. Beliefs about dragons vary drastically by region, but dragons in Western cultures since the High Middle Ages have often been depicted as winged, horned, four-legged, and capable of breathing fire. Dragons in Eastern cultures are usually depicted as wingless, four-legged, serpentine creatures with above-average intelligence. The earliest attested reports of draconic creatures resemble giant snakes. Draconic creatures are first described in the mythologies of the ancient Near East and appear in ancient Mesopotamian art and literature. Stories about storm gods slaying giant serpents occur throughout nearly all Indo-European and Near Eastern mythologies. Famous prototypical draconic creatures include the Meshusu of ancient Mesopotamia, Apep in Egyptian mythology, Vrtra in the Rig Veda, the Leviathan in the Hebrew Bible, Grangul in the Poitou region in France, Python, Ladon, Wyvern, and the Lernaean Hydra in Greek mythology, Jormungandr, Njörhögr, and Fafnir in Norse mythology, and the Dragon from Beowulf. That's a bit on the nose. The popular Western image of a dragon as winged, four-legged, and capable of breathing fire is an invention of the High Middle Ages, based on a conflation of earlier dragons from different traditions and of inaccurate scribal drawings of snakes. In Western cultures, dragons are portrayed as monsters to be tamed or overcome, usually by saints or culture heroes, as in the popular legend of St. George and the Dragon. They are often said to have ravenous appetites and to live in caves, where they hoard treasure. These dragons appear frequently in Western fantasy literature, including The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling, and A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. The word dragon has also come to be applied to the Chinese lung, which are associated with good fortune and are thought to have power over rain. Dragons and their associations with rain are the source of Chinese customs of dragon dancing and dragon boat racing. Many East Asian deities and demigods have dragons as their personal mounts or companions. Dragons were also identified with the Emperor of China, who, during later Chinese imperial history, was the only one permitted to have dragons on his house, clothing, or personal articles. Commonalities between dragon traits are often a hybridization of avian, feline, and reptilian features, and may include snake-like features, reptilian scaly skin, 4 legs with 3 or 4 toes on each, spinal nodes running down the back, a tail, and a serrated jaw with rows of teeth. Several modern scholars believe huge extinct or migrating crocodiles bear the closest resemblance, especially when encountered in forested or swampy areas, and are most likely the template of modern dragon imagery. This also fits with the ancient words Draco and Draken, meaning large serpent or sea serpent. Etymology. The word dragon entered the English language in the early 13th century from Old French dragon, which in turn comes from Latin draconem, nominative Draco, meaning huge serpent or dragon, and from ancient Greek drakon, meaning serpent or giant sea fish. The Greek and Latin term referred to any great serpent, not necessarily mythological. Sources of inspiration for dragon myths. Draconic creatures appear in virtually all cultures around the globe. Nonetheless, scholars dispute where the idea of a dragon originates from, and a wide variety of theories have been proposed. In his book, An Instinct for Dragons, in 2000, anthropologist David E. Jones suggests a hypothesis that humans, just like monkeys, have inherited instinctive reactions to snakes, large cats, and birds of prey. He cites a study which found that approximately 39 people in 100 are afraid of snakes, and notes that fear of snakes is especially prominent in children, even in areas where snakes are rare. The earliest attested dragons all resemble snakes or bear snake-like attributes. Jones therefore concludes that the reason why dragons appear in nearly all cultures is because of humans' innate fear of snakes and other animals that were major predators of humans' primate ancestors. Dragons are usually said to reside in dank caves, deep pools, wild mountain reaches, sea bottoms, haunted forests, all places which would have been fraught with danger for early human ancestors. In her book, The First Fossil Hunters, Dinosaurs, Mammoths, and Myth in Greek and Roman Times, also from 2000, Adrienne Mayer argues that some stories of dragons may have been inspired by ancient discoveries of fossils belonging to dinosaurs and other prehistoric animals. She argues that the dragon lore of northern India may have been inspired by observations of oversized, extraordinary bones in the fossil beds of the Siwalik Hills below the Himalayas, and that ancient Greek artistic depictions of the monster of Troy may have been influenced by fossils of Samotherium, an extinct species of giraffe, whose fossils are common in the Mediterranean region. In China, a region where fossils of large prehistoric animals are common, these remains are frequently identified as dragon bones, and are commonly used in Chinese traditional medicine. Mayer, however, is careful to point out that not all stories of dragons and giants are inspired by fossils, and notes that Scandinavia has many stories of dragons and sea monsters, but has long been considered barren of large fossils. In one of her later books, she states that, quote, many dragon images around the world were based on folk knowledge or exaggerations of living reptiles, such as Komodo dragons, Gila monsters, iguanas, alligators, or in California, alligator lizards. Now it's time to look at dragons around the world, starting in Africa, namely Egypt. In Egyptian mythology, Apep is a giant serpent who resides in the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. The Bremner Rind papyrus, written in around 310 BC, preserves an account of a much older Egyptian tradition that the setting of the sun is caused by Ra descending to the Duat to battle Apep. In some accounts, Apep is as long as the height of 8 men with a head made of flint. Thunderstorms and earthquakes were thought to be caused by Apep's roar, and solar eclipses were thought to be the result of Apep attacking Ra during the daytime. In some myths, Apep is slain by the god Set. As a side note, I think I might be pronouncing Apep differently from how I started, but get over it. Neebkau is another giant serpent who guards the Duat and aided Ra in his battle against Apep. Neebkau was so massive in some stories that the entire earth was believed to rest atop his coils. Denwen is a giant serpent mentioned in the pyramid texts, whose body was made of fire, and who ignited a conflagration that nearly destroyed all the gods of the Egyptian pantheon. He was ultimately defeated by the pharaoh, a victory which affirmed the pharaoh's divine right to rule. The Ouroboros was a well-known Egyptian symbol of a serpent swallowing its own tail. The precursor to the Ouroboros was the many-faced. No, not the Game of Thrones god. This was a serpent with 5 heads, who, according to the Amduat, the oldest surviving book of the afterlife, was said to coil around the corpse of the sun god Ra protectively. The earliest surviving depiction of a true Ouroboros comes from the gilded shrines in the tomb of Tutankhamun. In the early centuries AD, the Ouroboros was adopted as a symbol by Gnostic Christians, and chapter 136 of the Pistis Sophia, an early Gnostic text, describes a great dragon whose tail is in its mouth. In medieval alchemy, the Ouroboros became a typical Western dragon, with wings, legs, and a tail. A famous image of the dragon, gnawing on its tail from the 11th century Codex Marcianus, was copied in numerous works on alchemy. Moving on to Asia. South Asia. In the Rig Veda, the oldest of the 4 Vedas, Indra, the Vedic god of storms, battles Vrtra, a giant serpent who represents drought. Indra kills Vrtra using his Vajra, thunderbolt, and clears the path for rain, which is described in the form of cattle.
You won the cows, hero. You won the Soma. You freed the 7 streams to flow.
Rigveda 132:12. In another Rigvedic legend, the 3-headed serpent, Visvarupa, the son of Tvastir, guards a wealth of cows and horses. Indra delivers Visvarupa to a god named Trita Aptya, who fights and kills him and sets his cattle free. Indra cuts off Visvarupa's heads and drives the cattle home for Trita. The same story is alluded to in the younger Avesta, in which the hero, Thretona, the son of Vathpia, slays the 3-headed dragon Azidahaka and takes his 2 beautiful wives as spoils. Thretona's name, meaning 3rd grandson of the waters, indicates that Azidahaka, like Vrtra, was seen as a blocker of waters and cause of drought. The Druk, also known as Thunder Dragon, is one of the national symbols of Bhutan. In the Tsonga language, Bhutan is known as Druk Yul, or Land of Druk, and Bhutanese leaders are called Druk Gyalpo, or Thunder Dragon Kings. The Druk was adopted as an emblem by the Drukpa lineage, which originated in Tibet and later spread to Bhutan. Yeah, all of those pronunciations were a semi-educated guess. Do not, I repeat, do not assume they are correct. In fact, assume that most of them are incorrect. East Asia. Chinese dragon. Archaeologist Zhu Chongfa believes that the Chinese word for dragon is an onomatopoeia of the sound of thunder, or lung in Cantonese. For those who don't know, an onomatopoeia is a word that kind of resembles the sound of the thing it's describing. So like oink, meow, woof, stuff like that. The Chinese dragon is the highest-ranking creature in the Chinese animal hierarchy. Its origins are vague, but its ancestors can be found in Neolithic pottery, as well as Bronze Age ritual vessels. A number of popular stories deal with the rearing of dragons. The Zuo Zuan, which was probably written during the Warring States period, describes a man named Dongfu, a descendant of Yang Xuan, who loved dragons. And because he could understand a dragon's will, he was able to tame them and raise them well. He served Emperor Shun, who gave him the family name Huanglong, meaning dragon raiser. In another story, Gongxia, the 14th emperor of the Xia dynasty, was given a male and a female dragon as a reward for his obedience to the god of heaven, but could not train them. So he hired a dragon trainer named Lui Lei, who had learned how to train dragons from Huanglong. One day, the female dragon died unexpectedly, so Lui Lei secretly chopped her up, cooked her meat, and served it to the king, who loved it so much that he demanded Lui Lei to serve him the same meal again. Since Lui Lei had no means of procuring more dragon meat, he fled the palace. One of the most famous dragon stories is about the Lord Yi Gao, who loved dragons obsessively, even though he had never seen one. He decorated his whole house with dragon motifs and, Seeing this display of admiration, a real dragon came and visited Yi Gao. But the Lord was so terrified at the sight of the creature that he ran away. In Chinese legend, the culture hero Fu Xi is said to have been crossing the Lo River when he saw the Long Ma, a Chinese horse dragon with 7 dots on its face, 6 on its back, 8 on its left flank, and 9 on its right flank. He was so moved by this apparition that when he returned home, he drew a picture of it including the dots. He later used these dots as letters and invented Chinese writing, which he used to write his book, I Ching. In another Chinese legend, the physician Ma Shi Huang is said to have healed a sick dragon. Another legend reports that a man once came to the healer Lo Chen Zhen, telling him that he was a dragon and that he needed to be healed. After Lo Chen Zhen healed the man, a dragon appeared to him and carried him to heaven. In the Shanhai Jing, a classic mythography probably compiled mostly during the Han Dynasty, various deities and demigods are associated with dragons. One of the most famous Chinese dragons is Ying Long, meaning responding dragon, who helped the Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor, defeat the tyrant Qiyu. The dragon Zulong, or Torch Dragon, is a god who composed the universe with his body. In the Shanhai Jing, many mythic heroes are said to have been conceived after their mothers copulated with divine dragons, including Huangdi, Shenong, Emperor Yao, and Emperor Shun. The god Surong and the Emperor Qi are both described as being carried by 2 dragons, as are Huangdi, Tuangzu, Yu Kuang, and Roshu in various other texts. For a second I thought Roshu was the guy from Mulan, but that was Mushu. So, nope. According to the Huainanzi, an evil black dragon once caused a destructive deluge, which was ended by the mother goddess Nua by slaying the dragon. A large number of ethnic myths about dragons are told throughout China. The Huanshu, compiled in the 5th century BC by Fan Ye, reports a story belonging to the Ailoi people, which holds that a woman named Shai, who lived in the region around Mount Lao, became pregnant with 10 sons, after being touched by a tree trunk floating in the water while fishing. A likely story. She gave birth to the sons, and the tree trunk turned into a dragon, who asked to see his sons. The woman showed them to him, but all of them ran away except for the youngest, who the dragon licked on the back and named Juilong, meaning sitting back. The sons later elected him king, and the descendants of the 10 sons became the Ailawi people, who tattooed dragons on their backs in honor of their ancestor. The Miao people of southwest China have a story that a divine dragon created the first humans by breathing on monkeys that came to play in his cave. The Han people have many stories about short-tailed old Li, a black dragon who was born to a poor family in Shandong. When his mother saw him for the first time, she fainted, and when his father came home from the field and saw him, he hit him with a spade and cut off part of his tail. Li burst through the ceiling and flew away to the Black Dragon River in northeast China, where he became the god of that river. On the anniversary of his mother's death on the Chinese lunar calendar, old Li returns home, causing it to rain. He is still worshipped as a rain god. In China, dragons are closely associated with rain, and drought is thought to be caused by a dragon's laziness. Prayers invoking dragons to bring rain are common in Chinese texts. The luxuriant dew of the spring and autumn annals, attributed to the Han Dynasty scholar Dong Songchu, prescribes making clay figurines of dragons during a time of drought, and having young men and boys pace and dance among the figurines in order to encourage the dragons to bring rain. Texts from the Qing Dynasty advise hurling the bone of a tiger or dirty objects into the pool where the dragon lives. Since dragons cannot stand tigers or dirt, the dragon of the pool will cause heavy rain to drive the object out. Rainmaking rituals invoking dragons are still very common in many Chinese villages, where each village has its own god said to bring rain, and many of these gods are dragons. Although stories of the Dragon Kings are among the most popular dragon stories in China today, these stories did not begin to emerge until the Eastern Han, when Buddhist stories of the serpent rain god Naga became popular. Taoists began to invent their own dragon kings and eventually such stories developed in every major Chinese religion. According to these stories, every body of water is ruled by a dragon king, each with a different power, rank, and ability. So people began establishing temples across the countryside dedicated to these figures. That should be a good Skyrim mod. Go around to all these bodies of water and fight a dragon king and get their ability and whatnot. Nifty. Anyway, many traditional Chinese customs revolve around dragons. During various holidays, including the Spring Festival and Lantern Festival, villagers will construct an approximately 16-foot-long dragon from grass, cloth, bamboo strips, and paper, which they will parade through the city as part of a dragon dance. The original purpose of this ritual was to bring good weather and a strong harvest, but now it is done mostly only for entertainment. During the Duanwu Festival, several villages, or even a whole province, will hold a dragon boat race, in which people race across a body of water in boats carved to look like dragons, while a large audience watches on the banks. The custom is traditionally said to have originated after the poet Ku Yang committed suicide by drowning himself in the Milwu River, and people raced out in boats hoping to save him. But most historians agree that the custom actually originated much earlier as a ritual to avert ill fortune. Starting during the Han Dynasty and continuing into the Qing Dynasty, the Chinese emperor gradually became closely identified with dragons, and emperors themselves claimed to be the reincarnation of a divine dragon. Eventually, dragons were only allowed to appear on clothing, houses, and articles of everyday use belonging to the emperor, and any commoner who possessed everyday items bearing the image of the dragon were ordered to be executed. Eey. After the last Chinese emperor was overthrown in 1911, this situation changed, and now many ordinary Chinese people identify themselves as descendants of dragons. Not sure how much they actually believe that, but it's Wikipedia. Next up we have Korean Dragon. Pardon the wind, please. It's awfully stormy today. The Korean dragon is in many ways similar in appearance to other East Asian dragons, such as the Chinese and Japanese dragons. It differs from the Chinese dragon in that it developed a longer beard. Very occasionally, a dragon may be depicted as carrying an orb known as the Yoju, the Korean name for the mythical Sintanami, in its claws or its mouth. It was said that whoever could wield the Yoju was blessed with the abilities of omnipotence and creation at will, and that only four-toed dragons, who had thumbs with which to hold the orbs, were both wise and powerful enough to wield these orbs, as opposed to the lesser three-toed dragons. As with China, the number 9 is significant and auspicious in Korea, and dragons were said to have 81, which is 9 by 9, scales on their backs, representing yang essence. Dragons in Korean mythology are primarily benevolent beings, related to water and agriculture, often considered bringers of rain and clouds. Hence, many Korean dragons are said to have resided in rivers, lakes, oceans, or even deep mountain ponds. Human journeys to undersea realms, and especially the undersea palace of the Dragon King, are common in Korean folklore. In Korean myths, some kings who founded kingdoms were described as descendants of dragons, because the dragon was a symbol of the monarch. Lady Aryong, who was the first queen of Silla, is said to have been born from a cockatrice, while the grandmother of Taejo of Goryeo, founder of Goryeo, was reportedly the daughter of the Dragon King of the West Sea. There's also King Munmu of Silla, who on his deathbed wished to become a dragon of the East Sea in order to protect the kingdom. Dragon patterns were used exclusively by the royal family. The royal robe was also called the dragon robe. In Joseon Dynasty, the royal insignia featuring embroidered dragons were attached to the robe's shoulders, the chest, and back. The king wore 5-taloned dragon insignia, while the crown prince wore 4-taloned dragon insignia. And as always, those pronunciations were pulled directly from my butt. Korean folk mythology states that most dragons were originally imugis, or lesser dragons, which were said to resemble gigantic serpents. There are a few different versions of Korean folklore that describe both what emugis are and how they aspire to become full-fledged dragons. Koreans thought that an emugi could become a true dragon, yong or miru, if it caught a yuju, which had fallen from heaven. Another explanation states they are hornless creatures resembling dragons who have been cursed, and thus were unable to become dragons. By other accounts, an emugi is a proto-dragon which must survive 1,000 years in order to become a fully fledged dragon. In either case, they are said to be large, benevolent, python-like creatures that live in water or caves, and their sighting is associated with good luck. Japanese dragon. Japanese dragon myths amalgamate native legends with imported stories about dragons from China, Korea, and India. Like those other Asian dragons, most Japanese ones are water deities, associated with rainfall and bodies of water, and are typically depicted as large, wingless, serpentine creatures with clawed feet. Gould writes, "The Japanese dragon is invariably figured as possessing 3 claws." A story about the samurai, Minamoto no Mitsunaka, tells that while he was hunting in his territory of Setsu, he fell asleep under a tree and had a dream in which a beautiful woman appeared to him and begged him to save her land from a giant serpent, which was defiling it. Mitsunaka agreed to help, and the maiden gave him a magnificent horse. When he woke up, the horse was standing before him. He rode it to the Sumiyoshi temple, where he prayed for 8 days. Then he confronted the serpent and slew it with an arrow. It was believed that dragons could be appeased or exorcised with metal. Nito Yoshisada is said to have hurled a famous sword into the sea at Sagami to appease the dragon god of the sea, and Kino Tsurayuki threw a metal mirror into the sea at Sumiyoshi for the same purpose. Japanese Buddhism has also adapted dragons by subjecting them to Buddhist law. The Japanese Buddhist deities Benten and Kwannon are often shown sitting or standing on the back of a dragon. Several Japanese sennin, or immortals, have taken dragons as their mount. Momo is said to have hurled his staff into a puddle of water, causing a dragon to come forth and let him ride it to heaven. The Rakan Handaka is said to have been able to conjure a dragon out of a bowl, which he is often shown playing with on Kagami-buta. The Shachihoko is a creature with the head of a dragon, a bushy tail, fish-like scales, and sometimes fire emerging from its armpits. The Shifun has the head of a dragon, feathered wings, and the tail and claws of a bird. A white dragon was believed to reside in a pool in Yamashiro province, and every 50 years it would turn into a bird called the Ogonsho, which had a call like the howling of a wild dog. This event was believed to herald terrible famine. In the Japanese village of Okamura, near Edo, during times of drought, the villagers would make a dragon effigy out of straw, magnolia leaves, and bamboo, and parade it through the village to attract rainfall. And let's finish off East Asia with the Vietnamese dragon. According to an ancient origin myth, the Vietnamese people are descended from a dragon and a fairy. To Vietnamese people, the dragon brings rain, essential for agriculture. It represents the emperor, the prosperity and power of the nation. Like the Chinese dragon, the Vietnamese dragon is the symbol of Yang, representing the universe, life, existence, and growth. I think that was true of the Korean one as well. Yes. All right, that's it for East Asia. Moving on to West Asia. And these are some that I suspect a lot of people haven't heard of. Ancient West Asia. Mesopotamia. Ancient peoples across the Near East believed in creatures similar to what modern people call dragons. These ancient peoples were unaware of the existence of dinosaurs or similar creatures in the distant past. References to dragons of both benevolent and malevolent characters occur throughout ancient Mesopotamian literature. In Sumerian poetry, great kings are often compared to the Usungal, a gigantic serpentine monster. A draconic creature with the foreparts of a lion and the hind legs, tail, and wings of a bird appears in Mesopotamian artwork from the Akkadian period, circa 2334 to 2154 BC, until the Neo-Babylonian period, which was 626 BC to 539 BC. The dragon is usually shown with its mouth open. It may have been known as the Umunairu, which means roaring weather beast, and may have been associated with the god Ishkur, or Hadad. A slightly different lion dragon with two horns and the tail of a scorpion appears in art from the Neo-Assyrian period, 911 BC to 609 BC. A relief, probably commissioned by Sennacherib, shows the gods Ashur, Sin, and Adad standing on its back. Another draconic creature with horns, the body and neck of a snake, the forelegs of a lion, and the hind legs of a bird appears in Mesopotamian art from the Akkadian period until the Hellenistic period, which was 323 BC to 31 BC. This creature, known in Akkadian as the Mushusu, meaning furious serpent, was used as a symbol for particular deities and also as a general protective emblem. It seems to have originally been the attendant of the underworld god Ninazu, but later became the attendant to the Hurrian storm god Tishpak, as well as later Ninazu's son, Ningisida, the Babylonian national god Marduk, the scribal god Nabu, and the Assyrian national god Ashur. Scholars disagree regarding the appearance of Tiamat, the Babylonian goddess personifying primeval chaos slain by Marduk in the Babylonian creation epic Enuma Elish. She was traditionally regarded by scholars as having had the form of a giant serpent, but several scholars have pointed out that this shape cannot be imputed to Tiamat with certainty, and she seems to have at least sometimes been regarded as anthropomorphic. Nonetheless, in some texts, she seems to be described with horns, a tail, and a hide that no weapon can penetrate, all features which suggest she was conceived as some form of dragoness. Levant. In the Ugaritic Baal cycle, the sea dragon Lotunu is described as the twisting serpent, the powerful one with 7 heads. In one story, Lotunu is slain by the storm god Baal, but in another he is instead slain by the virgin warrior goddess Anat. In Psalms 74:13-14, the sea dragon Leviathan, whose name is a cognate of Lotunu, is slain by Yahweh, the national god of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, as part of the creation of the world. In Isaiah 27:1, Yahweh's destruction of Leviathan is foretold as part of Yahweh's impending overhaul of the universal order.
On that day Yahweh shall punish with his sharp, great, and strong sword Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent. He will slay the dragon that is in the sea.
Job 41, 1-34, contains a detailed description of the Leviathan, who is described as being so powerful that only Yahweh can overcome it. Job 41, 19-21 states that the Leviathan exhales fire and smoke, making its identification as a mythical dragon clearly apparent. In some parts of the Old Testament, the Leviathan is historicized as a symbol for the nations that stand against Yahweh. Rahab, a synonym for Leviathan, is used in several biblical passages in reference to Egypt. Isaiah 37 declares,
For Egypt's help is worthless and empty. Therefore I have called her the silenced Rahab.
Similarly, Psalm 87:3 reads,
I reckon Rahab and Babylon as those that know me.
In Ezekiel 29:3-5 and 32:2-8, the Pharaoh of Egypt is described as a dragon, or tenin. In the story of Bel and the dragon, from the apocryphal additions to Daniel, the prophet Daniel sees a dragon being worshipped by the Babylonians. Daniel makes cakes of pitch, fat, and hair, the dragon eats them, and bursts open. And that was Daniel 14:23-30. Post-classical West Asia. In Sufi literature, Rumi writes in his Masnavi that the dragon symbolizes the sensual soul, greed, and lust that need to be mortified in a spiritual battle. In Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, the Iranian hero Rustam must slay an 80-meter-long dragon, which renders itself invisible to human sight, with the aid of his legendary horse, Raksh. As Rustam is sleeping, the dragon approaches. Raksh attempts to wake Rustam, but fails to alert him to the danger until Rustam sees the dragon. Raksh bites the serpent while Rustam decapitates it. This is the third trial of Rustam's 7 labors. What a good horse! Rustam is also credited with the slaughter of other dragons in the Shahnameh and in other Iranian oral traditions, notably in the myth of Babre Bayan. In this tale, Rustam is still an adolescent and kills a dragon in the Orient, either India or China depending on the source, by forcing it to swallow either ox hides filled with quicklime and stones or poisoned blades. The dragon swallows these foreign objects and its stomach bursts, after which Rustam flays the dragon and fashions a coat from its hide, called the Babre Bayan. In some variants of the story, Rustam then remains unconscious for 2 days and nights, but is guarded by his steed Raksh. On reviving, he washes himself in a spring. In the Mandaean tradition of the story, Rustam hides in a box, is swallowed by the dragon, and kills it from inside its belly. The king of China then gives Rustam his daughter in marriage as a reward. Nowadays, whenever I picture somebody hacking their way out of a creature from the inside, all I picture is Guardians of the Galaxy. I love that scene so much. And it makes so much sense. Moving on to Europe. Proto-Indo-European. The story of a hero slaying a giant serpent occurs in nearly every Indo-European mythology. In most stories, the hero is some kind of thunder god. In nearly every iteration of the story, the serpent is either multi-headed or multiple in some other way. Furthermore, in nearly every story, the serpent is always somehow associated with water. Bruce Lincoln has proposed that a Proto-Indo-European dragon-slaying myth can be reconstructed as follows. First, the sky gods give cattle to a man named Tritos III, who is so named because he is the third man on Earth. But a 3-headed serpent named Ngui steals them. Tritos pursues the serpent and is accompanied by Hanner, whose name means man. Together, the 2 heroes slay the serpent and rescue the cattle. The way they wrote the names was a little weird, so they might not be perfectly correct, but I think you get the picture. Ancient Greece and Rome. The ancient Greek word, usually translated as dragon, drakon, could also mean snake, but it usually refers to a kind of giant serpent that either possesses supernatural characteristics or is otherwise controlled by some supernatural power. The first mention of a dragon in ancient Greek literature occurs in the Iliad, in which Agamemnon is described as having a blue dragon motif on his sword belt and an emblem of a 3-headed dragon on his breastplate. In lines 820 to 880 of the Theogony, a Greek poem written in the 7th century BC by the Boeotian poet Hesiod, the Greek god Zeus battles the monster Typhon, who has 100 serpent heads that breathe fire and speak all kinds of frightening animal noises. Zeus scorches all of Typhon's heads with his lightning bolts, and then hurls Typhon into Tartarus. In the Homeric hymn to Apollo, the god Apollo uses his poisoned arrows to slay the serpent Python, who has been causing death and pestilence in the area around Delphi. Apollo then sets up his shrine there. The Roman poet Virgil, in his poem Culex, lines 163 to 201, describe a shepherd having a fight with a big constricting snake, calling it serpens and also Draco, showing that in his time the 2 words were probably interchangeable. Hesiod also mentions that the hero Heracles slew the Lernaean Hydra, a multiple-headed serpent which dwelt in the swamps of Lerna. The name Hydra means water snake in Greek. According to the Bibliotheca of Pseudo-Apollodorus, the slaying of the Hydra was the second of the 12 labors of Heracles. Accounts disagree on which weapon Heracles used to slay the Hydra, but by the end of the 6th century BC, it was agreed that the clubbed or severed heads needed to be cauterized to prevent them from growing back. Heracles was aided in this task by his nephew, Iolaus. During the battle, a giant crab crawled out of the marsh and pinched Heracles' foot, but he crushed it under his heel. Hera placed the crab in the sky as the constellation Cancer. Well, unexpectedly good day for that crab. One of the Hydra's heads was immortal, so Heracles buried it under a heavy rock after cutting it off. And Disney fans will remember that whole exchange from the Hercules movie. For his 11th labor, Heracles must procure a golden apple from the tree in the garden of Hesperides, which is guarded by an enormous serpent that never sleeps, which Pseudo-Apollodorus calls Ladon. In earlier depictions, Ladon is often shown with many heads. The mythographer Pherecydes of Leros describes him as having 100 heads, a description which is repeated by Pseudo-Apollodorus. In Pseudo-Apollodorus' account, Ladon is immortal, but Sophocles and Euripides both describe Heracles as killing him, although neither of them specifies how. The mythographer Herodotus is the first to state that Heracles slew him using his famous club. Apollonius of Rhodes, in his epic poem The Argonautica, describes Ladon as having been shot full of poisoned arrows dipped in the blood of the Hydra. In Pindar's fourth Pythian ode, Aeetes of Colchis tells the hero Jason that the golden fleece he is seeking is in a copse guarded by a dragon, which surpassed in breadth and length a 50-oared ship. Jason slays the dragon and makes off with the golden fleece together with his co-conspirator Aeetes' daughter, Medea. The earliest artistic representation of this story is an Attic red figure kylix, dated to circa 480 to 470 BC, showing a bedraggled Jason being disgorged from the dragon's open mouth, as the golden fleece hangs in a tree behind him, and Athena, the goddess of wisdom, stands watching. A fragment from Pherecydes of Leros states that Jason killed the dragon, but fragments from the Naupactica and from Herodotus state that he merely stole the fleece and escaped. In Euripides' Medea boasts that she killed the Colchian dragon herself. In the most famous retelling of the story, from Apollonius of Rhodes' Argonautica, Medea drugs the dragon to sleep, allowing Jason to steal the fleece. Greek vase paintings show her feeding the dragon the sleeping drug in a liquid form from a phial, or shallow cup. In the founding myth of Thebes, Cadmus, a Phoenician prince, was instructed by Apollo to follow a heifer and found a city wherever it laid down. Cadmus and his men followed the heifer, and when it laid down, Cadmus ordered his men to find a spring so he could sacrifice the heifer to Athena. His men found a spring, but it was guarded by a dragon, which had been placed there by the god Ares, and the dragon killed them. Cadmus killed the dragon in revenge, either by smashing its head with a rock or using his sword. Following the advice of Athena, Cadmus tore out the dragon's teeth and planted them in the earth. An army of giant warriors known as Spartoi, which means sown men, grew from the teeth like plants. Cadmus hurled stones into their midst, causing them to kill each other until only 5 were left. To make restitution for having killed Ares' dragon, Cadmus was forced to serve Ares as a slave for 8 years. At the end of this period, Cadmus married Harmonia, the daughter of Ares and Aphrodite. Cadmus and Harmonia moved to Illyria, where they ruled as king and queen before eventually becoming transformed into dragons themselves. In the 5th century BC, the Greek historian Herodotus, not to be mistaken with Herodotus, reported in Book 4 of his histories that western Libya was inhabited by monstrous serpents. And in Book 3, he stated that Arabia was home to many small winged serpents, which came in a variety of colors and enjoyed the trees that produced frankincense. Herodotus remarks that the serpents' wings were like those of bats, and that, unlike vipers, which are found in every land, winged serpents are only found in Arabia. The 2nd century BC Greek astronomer Hipparchus, circa 190 BC to 120 BC, listed the constellation Draco, the dragon, as one of 46 constellations. Hipparchus described the constellation as containing 15 stars, but the later astronomer Ptolemy increased this number to 31 in his Almagest. In the New Testament, Revelation 12:3, written by John of Patmos, describes a great red dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 crowns, and a massive tail, an image which is clearly inspired by the vision of the four beasts from the sea in the book of Daniel, and the Leviathan described in various Old Testament passages. The great red dragon knocks
a third of the sun, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars
out of the sky, and pursues the woman of the apocalypse. Revelation 12:7-9 declares,
"And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against Dragon. Dragon and his angels fought back, but they were defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. Dragon the Great was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called Devil and Satan, the one deceiving the whole inhabited world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with him."
Then a voice booms down from heaven heralding the defeat of the Accuser. In 217 AD, Flavius Philostratus discussed dragons in India in The Life of Apollonius of Tyana. The Loeb Classical Library translation, by F.C. Conybeare, mentions that in most respects the tusks resemble the largest swine's, but they are slighter in build and twisted, and have a point as unabraded as shark's teeth. According to a collection of books by Claudius Aelianus called On Animals, Ethiopia was inhabited by a species of dragon that hunted elephants and could grow to a length of 180 feet or 55 meters, with a lifespan rivaling that of the most enduring of animals. Post-classical Germanic mythology. In the Old Norse poem Grimnismal, in the Poetic Edda, the dragon Njohugur is described as gnawing on the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree. In Norse mythology, Jörmungandr is a giant serpent that encircles the entire realm of Midgard, in the sea around it. According to the Gylfaginning from the Prose Edda, written by the 13th century Icelandic mythographer Snorri Sturluson, Thor, the Norse god of thunder, once went out on a boat with the giant Hymnir to the outer sea and fished for Jörmungandr using an ox head as bait. Thor caught the serpent and, after pulling its head out of the water, smashed it with his hammer, Mjolnir. Snorri states that the blow was not fatal. "And men say that he struck its head off on the seabed, but I think the truth to tell you is that the Midgard serpent still lives and lies in the surrounding sea." Towards the end of the Old English epic poem Beowulf, a slave steals a cup from the hoard of a sleeping dragon, causing the dragon to wake up and go on a rampage of destruction across the countryside. The eponymous hero of the poem insists on confronting the dragon alone, even though he is of advanced age. But Wiglaf, the youngest of the 12 warriors Beowulf has brought with him, insists on accompanying his king into the battle. Beowulf's sword shatters during the fight, and he is mortally wounded, but Wiglaf comes to his rescue and helps him slay the dragon. Beowulf dies and tells Wiglaf that the dragon's treasure must be buried, rather than shared with the cowardly warriors who did not come to the aid of their king. Which is kind of a jerk move, because he told them not to come. In the Old Norse Volsunga saga, the hero Sigurd catches the dragon Fafnir by digging a pit between the cave where he lives and the spring where he drinks his water, and kills him by stabbing him in the underside. At the advice of Odin, Sigurd drains Fafnir's blood and drinks it, which gives him the ability to understand the language of birds, who he hears talking about how his mentor Regin is plotting to betray him so that he can keep all of Fafnir's treasure for himself. The motif of a hero trying to sneak past a sleeping dragon and steal some of its treasure is common throughout many Old Norse sagas. The 14th century Flores saga Konungs og Sona Hans describes a hero who is actively concerned not to wake a sleeping dragon while sleeping past it. In the Ingvar saga Vidfurla, the protagonist attempts to steal treasure from several sleeping dragons, but accidentally wakes them up. Post-classical Western Europe. The modern Western image of a dragon developed in Western Europe during the Middle Ages, through the combination of the snake-like dragons of classical Greco-Roman literature, references to Near Eastern European dragons preserved in the Bible, and Western European folk traditions. The period between the 11th and 13th centuries represents the height of European interest in dragons as living creatures. The 12th century Welsh monk, Geoffrey of Monmouth, recounts a famous legend in his Historia Regum Britanniae, in which the child prophet Merlin witnesses the Romano-Celtic warlord Vortigern attempt to build a tower on Mount Snowdon to keep safe from the Anglo-Saxons. But the tower keeps being swallowed into the ground. Merlin informs Vortigern that underneath the foundation he has built is a pool with 2 dragons sleeping in it. Vortigern orders for the pool to be drained, exposing a red dragon and a white dragon, who immediately begin fighting. Merlin delivers a prophecy that the white dragon will triumph over the red, symbolizing England's conquest of Wales, but declares that the red dragon will eventually return and defeat the white one. This story remained popular throughout the 15th century. And, throughout the 20th. I remember reading that when I was a kid. The oldest recognizable image of a fully modern Western dragon appears in a hand-painted illustration from the medieval manuscript MS Harley 3244, which was produced in around 1260 AD. The dragon in the illustration has 2 sets of wings, and its tail is longer than most modern depictions of dragons, but it clearly displays many of the same distinctive features. Dragons are generally depicted as living in rivers or having an underwater lair or cave. They are envisioned as greedy and gluttonous, with voracious appetites. They're often identified with Satan due to the references to Satan as a dragon in the Book of Revelation. The 13th century Golden Legend, written in Latin, records the story of Saint Margaret of Antioch, a virgin martyr who, after being tortured for her faith in the Diocletianic persecution and thrown back into her cell, is said to have been confronted by a monstrous dragon, but she made the sign of the cross and the dragon vanished. In some versions of the story, she is actually swallowed by the dragon alive, and after making the sign of the cross in the dragon's stomach, emerges unharmed. The legend of Saint George and the Dragon may be referenced as early as the 6th century AD, but the earliest artistic representations of it come from the 11th century. And the first full account of it comes from an 11th century Georgian text. The most famous version of the story from the Golden Legend holds that a dragon kept pillaging the sheep of the town of Selene in Libya. After it ate a young shepherd, the people were forced to placate it by leaving 2 sheep as sacrificial offerings every morning beside the lake where the dragon lived. Eventually, the dragon ate all of the sheep, and the people were forced to start offering it their own children. One day, the king's own daughter came up in the lottery, and, despite the king's pleas for her life, she was dressed as a bride and chained to a rock beside the lake to be eaten. That's a strangely specific request for your food. Then St. George arrived and saw the princess. When the dragon arrived to eat her, he stabbed it with his lance and subdued it by making the sign of the cross and tying the princess's girdle around its neck. St. George and the princess led the now docile dragon into town, and George promised to kill it if the townspeople would convert to Christianity. All the townspeople converted, and St. George killed the dragon with his sword. In some versions, St. George marries the princess, but in others he continues wandering. Gargoyles are carved stone figures, sometimes resembling dragons, that originally served as waterspouts on buildings. Precursors to the medieval gargoyle can be found on ancient Greek and Egyptian temples, but over the course of the Middle Ages, many fantastic stories were invented to explain them. One medieval French legend holds that in ancient times, a fearsome dragon known as La Gargouille had been causing floods and sinking ships on the river Seine. So, the people of the town Rouen would offer the dragon a human sacrifice once each year to appease its hunger. Then, in around 600 AD, a priest named Romanus promised that if the people would build a church, he would rid them of the dragon. Romanus slew the dragon, and its severed head was mounted on the walls of the city as the first gargoyle. Dragons are prominent in medieval heraldry. Uther Pendragon was famously said to have had 2 gold dragons, crowned with red, standing back to back on his royal coat of arms. Originally, heraldic dragons could have any number of legs, But by the late Middle Ages, due to the widespread proliferation of bestiaries, heraldry began to distinguish between a dragon, which could only have exactly 4 legs, and a wyvern, which could only have exactly 2. Hey, it's the thing I was gonna do the video about today. In myths, wyverns are associated with viciousness, envy, and pestilence, but in heraldry, they are used as symbols for overthrowing the tyranny of Satan and his demonic forces. Late medieval heraldry also distinguished a draconic creature known as a cockatrice. This was actually mentioned earlier. A cockatrice is supposedly born when a serpent hatches an egg that has been laid on a dunghill by a rooster. And it is so venomous that its breath and its gaze are both lethal to any living creature, except for a weasel, which is the cockatrice's mortal enemy. A basilisk is a serpent with the head of a dragon at the end of its tail that is born when a toad hatches an egg that has been laid in a midden by a 9-year-old cockatrice. Like the cockatrice, its glare is said to be deadly. But we all know that because we've all seen Chamber of Secrets. Post-classical Eastern Europe. In Albanian mythology and folklore, Stihi, Ijubi, Bola, Bolar, Irshaja, and Kulshedra are mythological figures described as serpentine dragons. It is believed that Bola, a water and chthonic demonic serpent, undergoes metamorphosis, passing through 4 distinct phases if it lives many years without being seen by a human. The Bolar and Irshaja are the intermediate stages, while the Kulshedra is the ultimate phase, described as a huge multi-headed fire-spitting female serpent which causes drought, storms, flooding, earthquakes, and other natural disasters against mankind. She is usually fought and defeated by a Drangu, a semi-human winged divine hero and protector of humans. Heavy thunderstorms are thought to be the result of their battles. In Slavic mythology, the words tsme, tsmi, or smai are used to describe dragons. These words are masculine forms of the Slavic word for snake, which are normally feminine, like Russian tmeya. In Romania, there is a similar figure derived from the Slavic dragon and named tmei. Exclusively in Polish and Belarusian folklore, as well as in the other Slavic folklores, a dragon is also called smok. In South Slavic folklores, the same thing is also called lamia. Although quite similar to other European dragons, Slavic dragons have their peculiarities. In Russian and Ukrainian folklore, Zmei Gorinich is a dragon with 3 heads, each one bearing twin goat-like horns. He is said to have breathed fire and smelled of sulfur. It was believed that eclipses were caused by Gorinich temporarily swallowing the sun. According to one legend, Gorinich's uncle was the evil sorcerer Namal Shelovik, who abducted the daughter of the Tsar and imprisoned her in his castle in the Ural Mountains. Many knights tried to free her, but all of them were killed by Gorinich's fire. Then a palace guard in Moscow named Ivan Tsarevich overheard 2 crows talk about the princess. He went to the Tsar, who gave him a magic sword, and snuck into the castle. When Chelovek attacked Ivan in the form of a giant, the sword flew from Ivan's hand unbidden and killed him. Then the sword cut off all 3 of Gorinich's heads at once. Ivan brought the princess back to the Tsar, who declared Ivan a nobleman and allowed him to marry the princess. Attaboy. A popular Polish folktale is the legend of the Wawel dragon, which is first recorded in the Chronica Polinorum of Wincenty Kadlubek, written between 1190 and 1208. According to Kadlubek, the dragon appeared during the reign of King Cracus and demanded to be fed a fixed number of cattle every week. If the villagers failed to provide enough cattle, the dragon would eat the same number of villagers as the number of cattle they had failed to provide. Cracus ordered his sons to slay the dragon. Since they could not slay it by hand, they tricked the dragon into eating calf skins filled with burning sulfur. Once the dragon was dead, the younger brother attacked and murdered his older brother and returned home to claim all the glory for himself, telling his father that his brother had died fighting the dragon. The younger brother became king after his father died, but his secret was eventually revealed, and he was banished. In the 15th century, Jan Dlugos rewrote the story, so that King Crocus himself was the one who slew the dragon. Another version of the story, told by Marcin Bielski, instead has the clever shoemaker Szkuba come up with the idea for slaying the dragon. Bielski's version is now the most popular. And finally, modern depictions. Dragons and dragon motifs are featured in many works of modern literature, particularly within the fantasy genre. As early as the 18th century, critical thinkers such as Denis Diderot were already asserting that too much literature had been published on dragons. There are already in books all too many fabulous stories of dragons. In Lewis Carroll's classic children's novel, Through the Looking Glass, from 1872, one of the inset poems describes the Jabberwock, a kind of dragon. Carroll's illustrator, John Tenniel, a famous political cartoonist, humorously showed the Jabberwock with the waistcoat, buck teeth, and myopic eyes of a Victorian university lecturer, such as Carroll himself. In works of comedic children's fantasy, dragons often fulfill the role of a magic fairy tale helper. In such works, rather than being frightening as they are traditionally portrayed, dragons are instead represented as harmless, benevolent, and inferior to humans. They are sometimes shown living in contact with humans or in isolated communities of only dragons. Though popular in the 19th and early 20th century, such comic and idyllic stories began to grow increasingly rare after the 1960s, due to demand for more serious children's literature. One of the most iconic modern dragons is Smaug from J.R.R. Tolkien's classic novel, The Hobbit. No, I don't pronounce it Smaug, that's too fancy. Dragons also appear in the best-selling Harry Potter series of children's novels by J.K. Rowling. Other prominent works depicting dragons include Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Riders of Pern, Ursula K. Le Guin's Earth-Sea Cycle, George R.R. Martin's series A Song of Ice and Fire, and Christopher Paolini's Inheritance Cycle. Sandra Martina Schwab writes, with a few exceptions, including McCaffrey's Pern novels and the 2002 film Reign of Fire, dragons seem to fit more into the medievalized setting of fantasy literature than into the more technological world of science fiction. Indeed, they have been called the emblem of fantasy. The hero's fight against the dragon emphasizes and celebrates his masculinity, whereas revisionist fantasies of dragons and dragon slaying often undermine traditional gender roles. In children's literature, the friendly dragon becomes a powerful ally in battling the child's fears. Also, the popular role-playing game system Dungeons & Dragons, or D&D, makes heavy use of dragons. After recent discoveries in paleontology, fictional dragons are sometimes represented with no front legs, but when on the ground, walking on their back feet and the wrists of their wings, like pterosaurs did. For example, see the dragons in Game of Thrones and Smaug in the Hobbit movies. And that is dragons. That was a lot longer than expected. Yowza. It was a lot of work, but I actually learned quite a bit. I was really interested in learning about the dragons that you don't ever hear about. Like, sure, I know the English stories. I know about the King Arthur and the Smaugs and the, Hungarian horntails and whatnot. And, of course, the Chinese and Japanese dragons. But it was really cool hearing about all the other similar creatures from around the world. You definitely sort of see the merit to that claim about the species memory, or whatever that was. Anyway, I hope this was interesting. I hope this was maybe a little more interesting than the last few videos, and even if not, hopefully it was a little educational and passed the time. It sure passed my time. Ugh, and now it's going to pass a lot more time when I'm editing the audio. But that's none of your concern, so you don't have to worry about that. You do have to worry about my singing, though, which I'm absolutely keeping in, so screw you! Also, I apologize for all the pronunciations that I doubtlessly screwed up horribly, and for the terrible, terrible accents. But I enjoyed it, and I enjoy dragons, and I enjoy Wikipedia. So check it out. As always, if this has but whetted your appetite for knowledge, head over to Wikipedia. Do it. Do some reading. You can get through a lot more yourself than listening to me, and you can click on other stuff if you don't know anything else. So do it. It's fun. Anyway, until next time, hope you have a wonderful weekend. Probably going to be my last Lazypedia for a little bit because I will be able to get back to actual work soon. But until we meet again, later, Gators. Alright, so it seems that the Binding of Isaac game is just slightly longer than the actual audio, and I don't want to leave you hanging like that. So, I just found the St. George and the Dragon story on storynori.com, and I'm just gonna read it for you, and you can listen. To the 0 people who are still listening at this point anyway. That's okay. I'm gonna do me. So, St. George and the Dragon. 1,700 years ago, in the time of the Roman Empire, there was, just outside the city of Cyrene in North Africa, a large, stagnant, smelly pond. In this pond there lived a dragon. Whenever the dragon breathed on a person or an animal, they died on the spot. At first, the dragon breathed on all the sheep that lived in the fields around the city. Then, he started to attack the people, and threatened to kill them one and all. The people of Cyrene had no choice but to come to terms with the dragon. They agreed to give him 1 person every month, so long as he left the others alone and unharmed for the rest of the time. But how were they to decide which person to sacrifice? The king decreed that the names of every citizen should be scratched onto pieces of pottery and kept in a great urn. Each month, one of the names would be drawn out of the urn, and that person would be given to the dragon. In this way, men and women, both rich and poor, were chosen to be fed to the evil beast. Then one day, the name of the princess was shaken out of the urn. According to the king's own law, his daughter must be sacrificed. He called the people together and offered them gold and treasure if only they would agree to spare her from the dragon. The judges who oversaw the lottery said that it must be completely fair, or else the people would no longer accept it. And so, much saddened, the king said to the princess, "My dear, I shall never see your wedding day." A week went past, and the day arrived when she must meet her fate. The palace servants dressed her in her wedding gown and placed a crown of flowers on her head. They led her out of the city in a procession and headed for the lake where the dragon lived. As they were on their way, a Roman soldier came riding up to the city. His name was George, and he was a Christian from Cappadocia in Turkey. George stopped and asked why such a beautiful young woman was looking so sad on her wedding day. A citizen replied, "Because according to the law, she must this day marry the dragon who lives in that lake, and her wedding gift shall be death." George immediately replied, "If that really be the case, then let me slay the dragon." The citizens warned him that nobody stood a fighting chance against such a ferocious, plague-breathing lizard, but George was determined to save the princess. The people tied her to a tree by the lake and left her to meet her fate. George saw the dragon emerge out of the swampy waters, and he charged up on his horse and flung his spear into its shoulder. The dragon let out a piercing shriek. It was wounded, but not fatally. While it was writhing in pain, George managed to cut the princess free from her bonds. The dragon was enraged and rounded on his attacker. George retreated and called out to the princess to take off the belt from around her waist and to throw it at the dragon. This she did, and by a miracle, the belt wrapped itself round the dragon's neck like a collar. Immediately, the dragon became as peaceful as a lamb, and the princess was able to lead it by her belt back to the city. When the people saw the princess and George leading the dragon back to their walls, they became angry and afraid, until St. George drew out his sword and slew the dragon. Then the people knew that from then on, they could live safe and unharmed. So I guess this version of the story kind of left out the bit where he basically forced them into Christianity, and I think that's probably for the best. Wasn't a great look on Georgie. And what do you know, we have a bit more time, so let's find another story. Well, here's one that's similar to that Merlin story from earlier. And this is from myths.e2bn.org. The Welsh Flag, from Wales, UK. Many centuries ago, when dragons roamed the land, a white dragon descended upon a small village and decided to live there. The white dragon had an icy cold temper and would freeze everything in his path. But what the ice dragon did not know was that another dragon was already living in the area. A red fire dragon lived close to the village and was hibernating in a cave by the cliff. 6 months later, the red dragon awoke to find a huge white dragon wrapped around his village that he cared for. He could tell that his people were ill from the cold. The red dragon felt a chill of sorrow in the icy air. The land was bare. Nothing was able to grow, not even the pesky dandelions. The people were starving. The people longed for the red dragon to free them from the icy misery, so that their life and land could return to the sunny and warm climate that it was once before. The red dragon challenged the white dragon to a single combat fight at the top of the cliff the next day. The next morning, the red dragon flew up to the top of the cliff where the ice dragon awaited. The people of the village watched in terror, awaiting their fate. The red dragon lunged forward and hit the ice dragon's chest with his horn. The ice dragon howled with rage as the blue blood poured from his chest. The ice dragon slashed back using his tail and whacked the red dragon's head. The battle fell silent as the red dragon rocketed high up into the clouds. The people looked up to see the red dragon soar down like an arrow. In seconds, he sliced the other's head off using the point of his tail. The ice dragon fell dead to the ground. The crowd cheered with joy as the red dragon roared with triumph. The mayor of the village declared that the land should always fly a flag with the symbol of a red dragon on it. The flag's background should be half green and half white. The green to represent the lush green grass of the land, and the white to represent the ice. This way, no one would ever forget what happened. After the battle, the red dragon went back to his cave and fell into a deep sleep, and never woke up. From then on, it reigns in the green land of Wales in sorrow for the red dragon's death. Well, that was pretty nifty. I'm sure there was a bit of shade being thrown at England for that one, but what you gonna do? Now, I do actually have 5 more minutes to kill, so let's just have a little chat. I did not like the ending of Game of Thrones. There, I said it. What a brave statement. The only person to have that opinion. But actually, I really did. I was one of the latecomers to the hate, even as far as the Long Night, I think it was called, the one where the Night King is killed. Spoilers. I liked that episode. I thought it was really cool. I was a little annoyed that more people survived than I think should have, but I thought it was pretty good. For me, the thing that just totally ruined the series, well, not even the series, totally ruined the season and ruined the ending, was Daenerys. There was a phrase that I really enjoy. I forget who said it, but somebody said, foreshadowing is not character development. And that's something that the showrunners really should have heard. Because if you take the ending, clearly they knew that Daenerys had to go mad and had to kill people, and then Jon Snow had to kill her. This is what they were working towards. And so, they foreshadowed that leading up to it. If you know that this is the ending, you can look back at certain things and go, oh yeah, that kind of foreshadowed this. because she was a little more brutal than she necessarily needed to be. But that was not remotely sufficient to make it make sense that this person who all her life has been all about saving the innocents and all for the fellow man, and she released the slaves, and then all of a sudden, she just murders people. That's all it was. She had no need to kill the people. She just did it, and there was nothing that would make you think this. Yes, there had been moments where she looked a little off. Yes, she was a little paranoid about Jon Snow. But it makes no sense. Why would people... Ugh. Now, here's what I think should have happened. I think if they want Daenerys to have killed those people and go off the deep end, you have Cersei take the people and use them as human shields. Then Daenerys essentially has to kill innocents in order to do what she wants to do, take back the kingdom. Then I would understand it. It's a horrible choice to have to make, but that foreshadowing would lead you to think that, yeah, okay, maybe she would make this decision for the betterment of the kingdom. Because she thinks that she'd be a better ruler, and in the end, the people will be better off. But this Nazi Daenerys stuff was ridiculous. She had no need to kill the people. I know I said that already. I'm saying it again. She did not need to kill those dang people. Look how careful I'm being not to swear. Ugh. Yeah, there were other problems. Arya didn't really use her magical powers that she went on a whole adventure to gain. But, I don't even mind as much the whole Bran the Broken thing. I think it's silly, but I wouldn't have minded it. If they hadn't pooped the bed with Daenerys, I would have been totally fine with the last season. I would have been fine with the show. All leading up to it was pretty cool. It'd be a good enough ending that I'd be content. But I hate what they did. They did to my boy. But what you mean, my girl? Anyway, I think I've killed enough time to catch up to the Binding of Isaac game, so I will leave the rest blank and let you enjoy me finishing off Mega Satan. Who am I kidding? Nobody's watching at this point. But maybe for those who are, for those who watch this in the background, which is what I do a lot, and the reason that I do these videos in the first place, maybe you'll get to enjoy it. Because I like having stuff on in the background while I'm doing housework and stuff. And I think this would be pretty good for that. Anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I'll see you in the next video. Later, Gators.